My daughter traded me for her rich father-in-law on her wedding day. My final move left her speechless. My name is Jim. For 30 years, my world has smelled of grease, gasoline, and hot metal. It's a scent that has seeped into the very fabric of my being, clinging to my clothes, my skin, and the worn-out furniture of my small house. My hands don't look like other fathers' hands. They are a roadmap of my life, the lines etched deep with grime that no soap can ever truly wash away. The skin is thick, calloused, and decorated with a constellation of small, faded scars from slipped wrenches and sharp engine parts. They are the hands of a man who has spent a lifetime fixing other people's problems. It's not a glamorous life, but it's an honest one. It's the life that put a roof over my daughter's head and food on our table. For me, that was always enough. For my daughter, Clara, it was a different story. Her mother, Eleanor, left when Clara was just 8 years old. Eleanor was a dreamer, but her dreams were always set in places I couldn't afford to visit, let alone live in. She craved the shine of the world, the smooth, polished surfaces of a life untouched by manual labor. She'd look at my hands with a delicate, almost imperceptible frown, her perfect nose wrinkling in distaste. "That smell, it gets into everything, Jim," she'd say, her voice soft but laced with a disappointment that cut deeper than any shout. "It's the smell of being stuck, of never going anywhere." Eleanor didn't read Clara bedtime stories about fairies and dragons. She read from glossy magazines, her voice painting pictures of penthouses overlooking glittering cityscapes, of women in silk dresses who commanded boardrooms and never had to worry about a broken-down car or a leaking faucet. She was planting seeds in our daughter's young mind, seeds of discontent that I, with my simple love and honest work, had no idea how to weed out. The day she left, the silence she left behind was a physical presence. All she took was a single suitcase, and Clara's belief that our small, loving life was enough. The note she left on the refrigerator door was chillingly brief, written in her elegant script. "We deserve more than this." The "we" was a blade that twisted in my heart. She hadn't just left me, she had taken our daughter's contentment with her, leaving behind a void filled with a quiet, gnawing shame. For a long time, the little house on the edge of town felt cavernous and cold. It was the kind of place where you knew your neighbor's dinner plans by the smells wafting through the thin walls, a place Eleanor had despised. But Clara, my brave, bright little girl, she filled that silence. We became a unit, a team of two against a world that suddenly felt much bigger and more intimidating. I vowed that her world would never feel small, no matter how small our circumstances were. I took on every extra shift at the garage, my days bleeding into nights under the harsh fluorescent lights. My weekends were spent detailing the gleaming luxury cars of the wealthy, polishing away their smudges while my own life felt coated in grit. I'd stand in their marble driveways, the sun glinting off the perfect paintwork of a Mercedes or a BMW, and feel like a ghost from another world. My nights were spent at the workbench in our small, drafty garage, not just fixing cars, but fixing everything: a broken toaster, a wobbly chair, a toy with a missing wheel. I was a clumsy giant at her homework table, my big, grease-stained fingers struggling to hold a delicate pen as I helped her with algebra. When she needed money for a school trip to the state capital or a new dress for the homecoming dance, I'd find it. I sold the old watch my father had given me. I skipped meals, telling myself that the black coffee was enough to keep me going. My daughter would not go without. She would not feel the sting of being less than just because her dad was a mechanic. Her room was her castle. I painted it the bubblegum pink she wanted, and when she got older, I helped her cover those same walls with posters of pop stars and movie heroes. I built her a bookshelf with my own two hands, making sure it was sturdy enough to hold all her dreams. When she saw a fancy white bed with carved posts in a magazine, I spent a month of weekends building a copy out of solid oak I'd salvaged. My back ached for a week after, but her smile, The way her eyes lit up when she saw it was the only payment I ever needed. We didn't have fancy vacations. Our getaways were to Miller's Lake, a 40-minute drive away. We'd go armed with cheap fishing poles I'd repaired a dozen times, and a cooler packed with egg salad sandwiches and lukewarm soda. We would sit on the rickety wooden dock for hours, our feet dangling in the cool water, often in comfortable silence, just being together. Those were the good years, the years I thought my love would be enough to build a fortress around her, to protect her from her mother's poisonous legacy. She was brilliant, my Clara, top of her class, year after year. The day her acceptance letter to the state university arrived, I felt a pride so immense it threatened to lift me right off the ground. She was the first in our family to go to college. It was her ticket out, and I was determined to help her punch it. Her scholarships covered tuition, but I worked until I was bone-tired and hollowed out to cover the rest. There were months where my diet consisted of instant noodles, coffee, and the sheer will to see her succeed. I'd send her little care packages with her favorite snacks and a $20 bill tucked inside. That's what a father does. You do whatever it takes. The change began in her junior year. It was a slow fade, like a photograph left in the sun. The phone calls home became shorter, less frequent. When she did visit, an invisible wall stood between us. She seemed uncomfortable in our small, worn-out house, her eyes darting around as if seeing the frayed edges of the sofa and the water stain on the ceiling for the first time. She started talking about her new friends, their names dripping with old money and privilege. She spoke of summer homes in the Hamptons and ski trips to Aspen with a casualness that felt like a foreign language to me. And then she met Julian. He was Julian Blackwood, the sole heir to the Harrison Blackwood fortune. His father built skyscrapers, owned shipping lines, and moved markets with a single phone call. The first time Clara brought Julian home for dinner was an exercise in quiet agony. I could feel his discomfort, like a cold draft seeping through the floorboards. He was polite, but it was a brittle, polished politeness that held everyone at a distance. He looked around our living room, with its mismatched furniture, and my worn-out armchair, as if it were an exhibit in a museum of poverty. I'd spent the entire afternoon making my signature pot roast, the one Clara used to call her favorite. Julian picked at it, pushing the tender meat around his plate. I saw him, when he thought I wasn't looking, subtly wipe his fork on his designer napkin before taking a single, hesitant bite. His gaze kept flicking to the platinum watch on his wrist, a silent, ticking clock counting down the seconds until his escape. He called me Jim, not Mr. Evans, a small but deliberate assertion of status. He was not here to impress me, he was here to tolerate me for an evening. After that night, Clara never brought him home again. Our meetings were relegated to cheap diners and coffee shops halfway between her world and mine, neutral territory where the chasm between us wasn't so glaringly obvious. It was a sharp, persistent pain in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I wanted her to be happy, and if her happiness required me to be a background character in her life, a secret kept in the shadows, then it was a price I was willing to pay. The engagement announcement came via a phone call. Her voice was breathless, effervescent, but it wasn't the joy of love that animated her. It was the thrill of acquisition. She described the diamond ring in painstaking detail, the carats, the clarity, the cost. She talked about the Blackwood family name, the power it held, the doors it would open. She spoke of how her life was finally becoming what her mother had always said it should be. She barely mentioned Julian, the man. She spoke only of the life that came attached to him. Then came the conversation that shattered the ground beneath my feet. She appeared at the garage one crisp autumn afternoon, en une unexpected visite. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her gaze was fixed on a smudge of grease on the toe of her immaculate leather boots. "Dad, we need to talk about the wedding," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I wiped my hands on an old rag, a familiar warmth spreading through me at the thought that she still needed me for something, for some fatherly task. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? You need help building that floral archway from the magazine? I was looking at it, and I already got some ideas for the woodwork, how to make it sturdy. No, Dad, she took a shaky breath, the words tumbling out in a rushed, apologetic torrent. Julian's father, Mr. Blackwood. He's offered to walk me down the aisle. I went utterly still. The hum of the garage, the ticking of the wall clock, the drip of oil from the car on the lift, it all faded into a roaring silence. What did you just say? My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She shifted, twisting the enormous diamond on her finger. His family is very traditional, Dad. And, well, Harrison, Mr. Blackwood, he's a very important man. It's a gesture of welcoming me into the family. It looks better. It's about image, you understand. Image? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. What about the image of a daughter standing with her father? The man who raised her? The one who built you that princess bed and taught you how to ride a bike? Clara's eyes were glued to the oil-stained concrete floor. Dad, there's something else. Her voice dropped so low I had to strain to hear her. The Blackwoods, their social circle, they don't know about you. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. What do you mean they don't know about me? She finally looked up, her eyes pleading, but also hard. I told them my parents passed away in an accident a long time ago, that I was an orphan, raised by a distant uncle who also passed away recently. I felt the world tilt on its axis. My daughter, my Clara, the little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed better, whose tears I had wiped away, for whom I had sacrificed every spare dollar and every waking hour, was so profoundly ashamed of me that she had erased me from her life story. She had killed me off to make her narrative more palatable for a family of strangers. 22 years of unconditional love, of putting her first, of being her rock, and she had buried me to impress a rich man. The ghost of Eleanor's final words, "We deserve more than this," was standing right there in my garage, wearing my daughter's face. So where does that leave me on your wedding day, Clara? I asked, my voice hoarse, raw. Am I supposed to just not exist? To watch from a distance, while another man takes my place? She had the audacity to look relieved, as if my question was the opening she was waiting for. I was hoping you'd understand. I can still get you an invitation. Of course, you have to be there. I was thinking, maybe as a family friend? Mr. Peterson, from my old neighborhood? That way you can be there to see it, at least. Something inside me, the part that had held on to hope, that had made excuses for her, simply broke. I didn't yell. I didn't rage. The pain was too deep for that. I looked at the beautifully dressed stranger standing in my garage, and I felt a profound, bottomless sorrow. I think you should go now, Clara. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I was a phantom in my own life. I went to work, I fixed cars. I came home, but I was hollow. Clara sent a few texts, each one a cheerful, oblivious little dagger. The flower arrangements are going to be breathtaking. You'd love them. Just had my final dress fitting. It's like a dream. As if the issue was my mood, not her monumental betrayal. I finally texted her back, my thumbs feeling heavy on the small screen. I won't ruin your big day. Don't worry about me. The night before her wedding, I couldn't sleep. The silence in the house was deafening again, just as it had been after Eleanor left. I went out to my sanctuary, the garage. My hands, the very hands she was so ashamed of, needed to be busy. When Clara was a little girl, we used to sit on the back porch and watch the sparrows darting in and out of their nests in the old oak tree. She was fascinated by their resilience, their tireless work building a home from scraps. I found a perfect, smooth piece of maple wood I'd been saving. With my sharpest carving knife, I began to work. Each sliver of wood that fell to the floor felt like shedding a layer of my pain. I carved through the night, the garage lit only by a single bare bulb. By the time the first grey light of dawn broke through the grimy window, I was holding a small, delicate wooden sparrow, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. It was simple, unadorned, but it was perfect. It was a piece of me, a piece of the truth. I placed it in a small, plain cardboard box. On a little card, I wrote a single sentence: "Don't forget how to fly on your own." The next morning, the day of the wedding, I put on my cleanest pair of jeans and a decent shirt. I drove to the ridiculously opulent 5-star hotel where the event was being held. I parked my old pickup truck across the street, a dented, humble vessel in a sea of gleaming black town cars and sports cars. I watched as men in tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like jewels swept through the grand entrance. It was another world, a world built on the kind of wealth I couldn't even comprehend. I felt utter invisible. I walked to the entrance and found a young bellhop. I pressed the small box and a $50 bill, more than I could comfortably afford, into his hand. "Please make sure this gets to the bride's room. Miss Clara Evans. It's very important. Just leave it on her dressing table. There's no name." I didn't go to the wedding. I couldn't. I went home, sat in my worn-out armchair, and felt the weight of every single one of my 58 years. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was my friend Mike, a former cop who worked private security, often for high-end events. He was working the Blackwood wedding. "Jim, you are not going to believe what just went down here," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. It was a goddamn bloodbath. According to Mike, Harrison Blackwood was not a man who built an empire by leaving things to chance. He was meticulous, ruthless, and valued loyalty and honesty above all else, not for moral reasons, but because lies were a liability in his world. He had hired a private investigator to do a full deep-dive background check on his future daughter-in-law. The report had landed on his desk that very afternoon, complete with my name, my photo, the address of my garage, and 22 years of my life condensed into a few cold, hard paragraphs. Just before the ceremony was due to begin, as Clara was surrounded by her bridesmaids in a cloud of hairspray and silk, Harrison Blackwood had walked into the bridal suite. He wasn't yelling. He was calm, his voice like a shard of ice. He held a thin manila file. He looked directly at Clara, his eyes cold and assessing, and said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "Your story is quite remarkable, Clara. Truly inspiring, to overcome such humble beginnings, to pull yourself up from nothing. Your father, the mechanic, must be so very proud of you." Mike said you could have heard a pin drop. The color drained from Clara's face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. Blackwood let the words hang in the air, a public indictment. Then he placed the file on her dressing table, right next to the small opened cardboard box with the wooden sparrow inside. "The Blackwood family name is built on a foundation of integrity and truth," he continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This marriage, however, appears to be based on a foundation of deceit. That is an unacceptable risk to my family and my business. This cannot proceed." He didn't refuse to walk her down the aisle. He did something far more devastating. He turned on his heel, and with a quiet word to his personal security, was escorted from the room. Within minutes, the entire Blackwood family and their most influential guests followed him, a silent, orderly exodus that effectively cancelled the wedding before it had even begun. The event imploded. The opulent ballroom, set for 300 guests, became a cavern of humiliation. Julian, his face a mask of white-hot fury and shame, had a short, brutal argument with Clara in the center of the dance floor. He then turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in her magnificent white gown, a tragic queen in an empty kingdom. She had her fairy tale wedding, but the prince and the entire kingdom had vanished. Before I could even process the full scope of Mike's story, my phone rang again. The screen flashed with her name. It was Clara, and she was screaming, a raw, primal sound of pure rage. "How could you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You sent him something, didn't you? You told him. You couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't bear to see me happy, to see me have something more than your greasy, pathetic life." "I didn't tell anyone anything, Clara," I said, my own voice unnervingly calm. "Lies!" she screamed. "He knew everything. He read it out like a death sentence. He shamed me in front of everyone. This is all your fault. You, and your filthy hands, and your broken-down life. I wish you really were dead. I wish you had died in that accident I invented." She hung up. An hour later, I tried to call back. My number was blocked. I heard through the grapevine, the small town was buzzing with the scandal, that the marriage was officially annulled within a week. The ironclad prenuptial agreement she had so eagerly signed left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a mountain of public humiliation. Life moved on, as it always does. The pain began to scar over. I started, for the first time, to build a life for myself, not for someone else. I met a wonderful woman named Sarah, a librarian with kind eyes and a laugh that made me feel 10 years younger. She loved hearing my stories about the garage. One evening, she took my hands in hers, traced the callous lines with her finger, and said, "These are the hands of a man who builds things, who fixes what is broken. They're beautiful." She said it with a pride that I had never heard in a woman's voice before. Slowly, carefully, we started building something real together. Almost a year to the day after the disastrous wedding, I was closing up the garage for the night, wiping the last of the grease from my hands. A dented 10-year-old sedan I didn't recognize pulled into the lot. The engine coughed and sputtered before dying. Clara got out. She looked weathered. The expensive clothes and perfect hair were gone, replaced by simple, slightly worn jeans and a faded jacket. She was thinner, and there were new lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She wasn't crying. She looked angry. A brittle, defensive Anger. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice firm, as if she were the one who had been wronged. We stood there in the fading twilight, the familiar smell of oil and metal hanging between us like an unspoken truth. "What do you want, Clara?" I asked, my voice even. "I wanted to tell you that you got what you wanted," she said, her words laced with a year of simmering bitterness. "You did it. You ruined my life. I lost everything. My fiancé, my friends, my apartment. I have nothing. Are you happy now? Is this the life you wanted for me?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and for the first time since she was a little girl, I didn't feel the pull of paternal pity or the sting of sadness. I felt a quiet, unshakable resolve. "I never wanted to ruin your life, Clara," I said, my voice as steady as the steel engine block beside me. "I just wanted you to have a good one. A real one." "A real one? Like this?" She scoffed, gesturing dismissively at the garage, at the tools on the wall, at my entire life. A life that smells of grease? A life where you work until your back breaks, and you never have anything nice to show for it? And that's when the final move, the one I had been unknowingly preparing for this whole time, became crystal clear. "This was never about the grease, Clara. It was never about the money," I said, taking a step closer. "This is about your mother. When you were just a little girl, she planted a seed of poison in your head. She taught you to be ashamed of an honest day's work. She taught you that my love was worth less than a big house and a fancy car. Harrison Blackwood didn't ruin your life. Julian didn't ruin your life. I damn sure didn't ruin your life. That poison seed your mother planted, the one you let grow until it choked out everything else, that's what ruined your life." She stared at me, speechless. The anger on her face began to crumble, revealing the raw, hollow pain underneath. "You are just like her," I continued, the words coming out soft but heavy as iron. "When things get hard, you look for someone else to blame. You blamed me for your humiliation, but you were the one who told the lies. You were the one who was ashamed of the man, who gave you everything he had. You erased me." Tears, real tears this time, welled in her eyes and traced paths through the city grime on her cheeks. I just wanted a better life," she whispered, the sound broken. "There is nothing better than an honest life, Clara. There is nothing better than being proud of who you are and where you come from," I said. I reached into my pocket, but I didn't pull out my wallet. I pulled out my keys. "You say you want a second chance? It doesn't start with an apology to me. It starts right here, with you." I pointed a thick, stained finger towards an old, dusty Ford Falcon in the back corner of the garage, a project car I hadn't had time to touch in years. It was covered in a layer of grime, its tires flat, its engine silent for a decade. "You want to learn what's real? Start there. The engine is seized. The carburetor needs to be rebuilt from scratch. The wiring is shot. You want to fix your life? Start by fixing something real. With your own two hands, prove to yourself, not to me, that you're not your mother. Prove that you can build something from wreckage, instead of just looking for something shiny to acquire." She looked from the derelict car to my face, her mouth slightly agape. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, terrifying confusion. The choice hung in the air, as clear and stark as the contrast between this dusty garage and the gilded ballroom she had lost. She could run away again, just like Eleanor, or she could stay and face the wreckage she had made. "The tools are on the wall," I said quietly, my voice leaving no room for argument. "The work starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you're here, you're here. If you're not, I'll understand." The next morning at exactly 7:59 a.m., I was in the garage, a mug of hot coffee in my hand. I didn't know if she would come. A part of me, the part that had been hurt so deeply, almost expected her not to. I had Sarah, I had my life, I had made my peace. I heard a soft knock on the side door. I opened it. There she was. She wore an old pair of jeans and a grey sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was pale, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep. She didn't look sorry. She looked furious, defiant, and exhausted. She didn't say good morning. She didn't apologize. She just looked at me, her jaw set, and said, "So, where do we start?" I took a sip of my coffee and nodded toward the Mustang. "We don't start. You do. First thing you're going to do is get it up on jack stands. Then you're going to drain the oil. It's probably been sitting in that pan for 10 years. It'll be sludge." I pointed to a heavy-duty floor jack and 4 jack stands. "Figure it out." I turned and went back to the engine I was rebuilding for a customer, leaving her there. I could feel her eyes on my back, burning with resentment. For the next hour, there was only the sound of her grunting and the scrape of metal on concrete. She struggled. She didn't know where the jack points were on the frame. She put the jack in the wrong place twice. I didn't help. I just watched out of the corner of my eye. Finally, with a loud curse and a final shuddering pump, the front of the car lifted off the ground. It was a small, clumsy victory, but it was hers. Getting the oil pan bolt undone was another battle. It was rusted tight. I gave her a breaker bar and told her to put her whole body into it. She pulled and pulled, her face red with exertion. "Nothing. I can't," she gasped, throwing the wrench down. "It's stuck." "Everything's stuck at first," I said without looking up from my work. "Doesn't mean you quit. Try again. This time, don't just use your arms. Use your legs. Use your weight." She glared at me, then picked up the wrench. She repositioned herself, braced her feet, and pulled with everything she had. There was a terrible, screeching groan of protesting metal, and then a sudden crack as the bolt broke free. She stumbled backward, landing on the dusty floor. A slow, thick, black sludge began to drip from the engine, smelling like tar and decay. She stared at it, then at her hands. They were covered in grease and grime. Under one of her fingernails, there was a smear of black oil. She looked like she wanted to be sick, but I also saw something else in her eyes, a flicker of surprise, the surprise of making something happen. The days turned into a week. It was a slow, painful process. Every morning at 8 a.m., she was there. We barely spoke. Our conversations were about tools and tasks. Where's the 9/16 socket? How do I get this belt off? What's this part called? I was her instructor, not her father. I was patient. I was clear, but I offered no sympathy. When she cut her knuckle on a sharp piece of metal, I pointed her to the first aid kit and told her to put a bandage on it and get back to work. One afternoon, Sarah stopped by, bringing a bag with 2 thick sandwiches and a thermos of iced tea. She smiled warmly at Clara. "You must be exhausted," Sarah said kindly, handing her a sandwich. "Jim told me you were helping out. That's a big project you've taken on." Clara just mumbled a thanks, unused to this simple, unconditional kindness. She watched as Sarah came over to me, put a hand on my shoulder, and gave me a kiss. She saw the easy affection between us, the quiet understanding. She saw the way I smiled at Sarah, a real smile that reached my eyes. It was a world away from the strained, performative life she had tried to build with the Blackwoods. She ate her sandwich in silence, her eyes on the rusted car. The second week, they started on the engine itself. It had to be pulled. It was a massive, greasy heart that hadn't beaten in a decade. I showed her how to attach the engine hoist, how to unbolt the transmission, how to disconnect the dozens of hoses and wires. It was heavy, dirty work. One evening, as she was struggling to clean years of caked-on grease from a valve cover, she finally broke. "Why this car?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. "Why this piece of junk? You could have just told me to sweep the floors for a year. Why make me do this?" I stopped my own work and wiped my hands on a rag. I walked over and looked at the car. "I bought this car when you were 16, I said quietly. "You had just gotten your driver's license. You were obsessed with old Mustangs. You had posters of them on your wall, right next to those boy bands." She looked up, her expression changing from anger to confusion. She remembered. "This was going to be your car," I continued. "My plan was to spend the next year fixing it up with you. For us to do it together. It was going to be your graduation present. A father-daughter project." I looked at her, my gaze steady. "But then you went off to college. You met new people. You stopped calling as much. You didn't want to come home to the greasy garage anymore. So the car just sat here. I didn't have the heart to work on it alone." The wrench slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. The silence in the garage was deafening. This wasn't a punishment. This was a resurrection. It was the resurrection of a dream I'd had for her, for us, long before Julian Blackwood and his world of lies ever existed. She didn't say anything. She just stared at the engine hanging from the hoist, at the empty space under the hood. For the first time, she wasn't looking at a piece of junk. She was looking at a broken promise. And she finally understood that she wasn't just fixing a car. She was trying to fix what she had broken inside that empty space. She bent down, picked up the wrench, and with a quiet determination that I hadn't seen before, she went back to work, her hands no longer hesitating as they plunged into the grease. The work wasn't over. It wasn't even close. But for the first time, I knew she wouldn't be leaving. She was finally home,